Welcome everybody to this episode of O365Eh. Tonight we're going to explore return to the office. It's a continuation of our theme from a couple of episodes ago about hybrid work scenarios. Now more people are returning to the office, and today we're going to explore some topics about how to make teams work well in the return to office scenario. And in particular, Habib, I know you've done some work with some roaming bandwidth policies, so why don't you kick us off and start talking about that?
Yeah, thanks, Kurt. So, yeah, I think it's really important to ensure that your network is obviously enabled, to handle all the Teams traffic that potentially is new to your environment, right? So, a lot of organizations, used different tools internally for voice and video communication, and then obviously when COVID hit, they had to quickly migrate or onboard Teams, and so maybe your network is not really there yet in order to keep up with that traffic. So helped some customers go through this process of building out the roaming policies that is a new feature that Microsoft came out with, and we're going to be doing something different where I'm going to demo the process. So essentially, there's three different aspects of the roaming policies. So there's a roaming policy, a trusted IP, and a network site. So the first thing you want to do is you want to identify sort of what the maximum bandwidth that you want to offer within your organization, to limit the people that are inside the office to a specific bit rate. And the idea is that anybody that is in the office would have a lower bit rate, and then anybody outside of the office would have the max bit rate, which is 50,000 kilobits. So once you identify sort of what the policy is or what the network that you want to have, and you may also want to have different policies for different regions, because maybe you have different locations that have better network capacities in those locations. So maybe you want to identify those. So for instance, I'm gonna create a couple of policies here. One I'm going to call Ottawa, and I'm going to change that bit rate to 2000. I'm going to enable IP on. And then the next one here, maybe I have another site outside in Vancouver. And then I'm going to also maybe give them 3000 because they have a better bandwidth quality. Right. So once you have these set, next thing you want to do is basically we're going to be working from a right to left kind of scenario. Next thing you want to do is you want to add the trusted IP. And so I found with some organizations that tried to implement this themselves, they got confused as to what this actually was. And this is actually the public IP address for your internet traffic at your office, right? So it's going to be whatever your, what is my IP when you're sitting inside the office, whatever that is, and then it may be multiple public IP addresses because you have different breakout points within your organization, right? So I can enter in 24.24.24.123, let's say. Let's say it's a 32. And apply that. And you can also implement if you have an IPv6 scenario or IP address in there as well. And then lastly, what you want to do is go to your network sites and start building your sites out. So I think, Michael, you mentioned this before, you sort of want to start building what your subnet IPs and stuff like that are in all the different regions. And if you can break them out, obviously, by wired and wireless, I think that's really important so that you have that ability, whether you're on wired or wireless connections. And when you add the sites, you can do a lot of, I think, a few other things inside here. I think Dina mentioned like E911 capabilities that you can configure in here. For this specific demo, we're only going to be talking about network roaming policies, so we're only going to be configuring that. So you don't have to configure a region. All you have to do is just name a site, then select the network roaming policy that you want to apply, and then add a subnet. So I did find, I'm not sure if it's fixed, but I did find an issue where if you have if you add subnets, like multiple ones after each other and then hit save, it only saves one subnet, so you have to enter in one at a time. But I did raise an issue, so hopefully that'll get fixed in the short term. So we'll click apply there, and then maybe we'll enter in 10.1.1.0, and we'll do that. Okay, and then apply, and then save. Not sure if it's going to error. Okay, let's go back in and see if it actually saved it. Cool. So it's already fixed it. Perfect. Any questions, guys, so far? Or any comments about sort of what the reasoning or the process for doing this kind of functionality?
Yeah, I think there's a few items like you mentioned, the trusted IP is the public netted IP for the client traffic. Where I see struggles with this is hey, we're using a third-party a proxy service, like say Zscaler. There's some planning around getting that implemented. On the network site side, sometimes we see that subnets may span physical locations. So it is an issue with the emergency calling side. So that would probably implement or cause a problem with these roaming policies. I think the big thing to highlight with these roaming policies is before we had roaming policies, we could only do this at the meeting policy level, which meant you assign a policy to a user, and wherever they go, they're going to have that limitation of bandwidth. And so they could be at home with gig internet, or they could be in a highly connected site or a satellite site, and they're only allowed to use that level that you've applied the policy. So now that this is more dynamic and it changes where you are in the infrastructure, I think that's a huge win for as we plan to bringing these technologies back into the office.
And a couple questions would be, when you set that bit rate, any advice on how did you pick the bit rate for a particular location? Obviously, it's based on bandwidth in the location, but was there sort of a ratio, or is it good to look at the network saturation with other applications at that site?
Yeah, I think that's key. Obviously, if you have some network monitoring tools that will help you provide that data and analytics. I'm not sure if the the call quality dashboard or the call quality analytics provides those feature set as well. But definitely, you want to be able to have it within a specific range where you're not restricting it so bad that the end user is going to have a really bad experience. And I've seen it as low as 800 kilobits per second, where it's not bad. The video still works fine. It's not as clear, obviously, if you have a higher bit rate, but you still have that ability you still utilize the product without restricting it, and that includes desktop sharing as well. So it's I've seen it as low as that particular number.
Yeah, and Kurt, to your point, on that note, it's a perfect opportunity with everybody thinking or talking about or actually going back to the office, because a few of my customers are now actually on-prem, is to review your organization's needs for the bandwidth requirements for Teams. And you can just do a quick search for literally prepare your organization's network for Microsoft Teams, and that, if you Bing or Google that, it's going to give you the list of bandwidth requirements for Microsoft Teams. So it's a good time to review those. As well, if you haven't already done this, it's another good opportunity to review the IP addresses, the requirements, because there are changes to those in the last few months. There have been some changes. That's aka.ms/O365 IPs. So that will give you the list of what's current in terms of the IPs and ports you need to open for Teams. And then lastly, another tool to run is the connectivity.office.com tool. We had a podcast on that several months ago, but another plug for that tool. I find it invaluable. And if you haven't already run that tool, you should run it at each of your office locations to get an idea of what the bandwidth and quality of, or if there's any issues or potential blockers for teams at all. So those are all 3 good steps you can take to figure that out in terms of what you should set these policies to.
That's a good call out. And actually, I was just running the test myself, and you can run this test at home or anywhere and just see what your connectivity is to the Microsoft cloud services, which is really, really valuable.
Yeah, and I don't know if I'm not sure if we talked about this, but there's a network planner in Teams, and in fact it's been there since day one, or close to it anyway, where you can actually build out. The tool does nothing from a configuration perspective, but what it lets you do is simulate your network in the Teams admin center. Thank you, Habs brought it up. So you can build out your network sites here, and then define personas for users, saying, okay, well, the Toronto site has 1,500 users, and they're all office workers. So you can, that tells Teams, that tells the tool how much bandwidth they're going to use. The Vancouver office may only have 50 people, and they're only going to be, they're not doing meetings, for example. So you can set the personas and build that whole thing out. And then it dumps a nice report to tell you exactly what the network impact of Teams will be for your organization, both at the site level and then your overall internet requirements. And because Microsoft now recommends, local internet breakout, understanding what each site's impact on the network is going to be is important. Because if you don't have local internet breakout, then all that traffic is going to be backhauling back to where your internet breakout is. So it becomes an invaluable tool for helping network planners understand what the impact of Teams is.
Yeah, like you said, the network planner is great to kind of model. Obviously it's not dynamic in any way, so whatever you put in there, it does a calculation. So it kind of gives you that spot check of, is this going to be a problem when our users increase in the office? The roaming bandwidth that Hab is going to kind of show end to end of what that is to kind of troubleshoot and stuff like that. That controls the bandwidth at certain sites that may have smaller links. Of course, prioritizing the traffic is the next item. Implementing QoS and getting your your voice traffic to the edge of your network as fast as possible over other traffic. That's priority. Dino, you brought up the connectivity.office.com tool, which is a fantastic tool. I use it all the time, again, to make sure that customers are VPN split tunneling when they have users remote, see how the traffic is routing through their network, see if it's, getting out to the right front door service on the Microsoft side. That tool now has a standalone version. So there's a command line version of connectivity.office.com. So you can script it and do stuff. I mean, it doesn't replace a full network assessment, but it is interesting that you can now do it kind of offline of the portal, and you can keep that, interpret your results kind of offline without submitting that data. But it does now require .NET Core 6 as it installs. So it does require min access, because I don't think it's installed by default through the OS at this point. So there is some prerequisites to run that tool.
Awesome. Yeah. So then, so in addition to all that, so the next step, obviously, once you've added in your sites, as Michael mentioned, how you modify the bit rate before was in the meeting policy. Well, that's actually where you enable the roaming policy as well. So when you go into your global policy here, you'll now notice there's this new network configuration lookup option. And then when you have this flag turned on and save it, what will happen is that if a user is assigned this global policy, when the, obviously their Teams gets connected, it will do a check to say, okay, what's your IP address? What's your trusted IP address? And then if those match with those values that we specified within the network topology, I'm just going to click save here, then it will apply that roaming policy to you. So that's how it works. So you notice here that we still have the full media bit rate still at 50,000, and then if something matches, then it will drop me down to that particular number. One thing also to note too is that, let's say you have some users that that have accessibility requirements that always require a certain bandwidth because of what they need. What you can do is you can just create a new meeting policy policy for them and assign that policy directly to them and modify the bit rate to what the specifications are, and don't enable that network configuration lookup for them. So no matter whether they are in the office or outside the office, they'll have the same bandwidth capabilities for that. So that's just one thing to note, that if you have that requirement. So once that's all said and done and it's replicated across the network to all of the Teams clients, here's what will happen. So to get these log files, you can just right click on the Teams desktop client in your system tray and say collect support files. It will download a bunch of files into your downloads directory, and then you want to go into the directory and then go to the web folder, and then you're going to go into the calling.txt file. And so when you open it up, you're going to look for these particular settings. So over here, we have two users on the left-hand side, right here and right here. They are both at home on VPN with split tunneling. And then this user over here on the right-hand side is actually sitting in the office. So notice here that's highlighted for both the users that are at home that they are given the default policy because there's nothing that matched within their subnets. You notice here it says no match and no matched, or not matched, I should say. And these are the IP addresses of their local networks. So they're given the default policy, but the user here on the right, you notice here, now they're given this new policy, which is called Ottawa. The bit rate is set to 800. They allow IP video to true. It's a trusted network, right? And basically their subnet is the one that is there. The public IP address for their site is the one that's specified here, obviously blurred out because it's customer data. But this is the trusted IP addresses that we entered in for the client. So it matched all that settings, including the subnet information down here, and assign that to the user. So now this user, he has the media bit rate of 800, right? So that's how how everything sort of ties together when you create the the roaming bandwidth policy, trusted IP, network sites, and then apply that into the meeting policy. And if everything matches, then you're going to get the policy that brings down your network connectivity.
That's great. You have to be really mindful of that. So it's enabling that network configuration lookup in the meeting policy that's applied to the user that triggers that roaming profile.
Yeah. So most of this configuration that you see here was in the preview, like in the public preview. The one thing that made it public was that trigger inside the meeting policy that was not there during the public preview.
Got it. And just one last quick question. Let's say you implement this, and then for a particular user, you're wondering if that roaming policy isn't in effect. Is there something you can do, some logs you can gather to actually show it?
Yeah, so that's just basically like on the end user side of things. Like I said, collect the support files on the Teams desktop. And then if you go into the calling, the web folder and the calling log, you'll see the details that are shown within this screenshot here. So if you don't have the policy assigned, this is what you're going to look for. And if you do have the policy assigned, this is what it will look like.
Got it. Cool.
And just one thing to note, the media bandwidth that you're setting, that isn't for that site. That is for that individual user's session, right? So you still have to do some planning of like, hey, I have 1,000 people at this site. You're gonna have to think about, how much bandwidth are you gonna allocate to that service? It's not really, the end users aren't aware of each other. I mean, obviously the adaptive codecs will see that the network is throttling and stuff like that, and it will kind of adjust. But that bandwidth is a per user kind of max average, right?
Yep. Yeah, for sure. And I think that, comes back to that, network planner tool that Dino mentioned before is going to be good, right? Because you can load up different personas and see how much people that are at that site and how much bandwidth that you have. How does it sort of work out to be whatever your number is, right? And obviously it's, it's also, trial and error too, right? So you're going to be able to set it at a number. Okay, well, maybe that's too high. Maybe we need to drop it, or maybe it's too low. You need to raise it. So, yeah.
Do
you know if that applies to the VDI client? Because I think on the emergency side, if you're using the browser version of Teams and not the desktop, and I think in the VDI at this time, it doesn't do the network detection. So I'm guessing it also doesn't apply the roaming profile or bandwidth profile.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that.
One question popped into mind. Talk about experimenting. Let's say you change the bit rate in that roaming profile. Any idea on how long that'll take effect for a particular individual?
So in my testing, it was actually pretty quick. I would say within an hour, I saw the replication happen. Like, I would obviously close down my Teams client, and then I would reopen it. And then once I would do that, I would download the files, because it would be like a fresh set of logs, as opposed to using the Teams client for a while and downloading the logs. Then you have to sort of sift through where it is, as opposed to if you do it fresh, it's literally like right at the top part of the log. But I mean, it takes time. It's replication, so I mean, you're not sure exactly when it's going to hit. But I've seen it around an hour for the replication to happen.
Well, that's good.
On the networking side, I typically, I think it's a 2-hour SLA for adding like trusted IP addresses and subnet information because of the emergency services side. So I think it's just a replication of the policy that Hab's talking about.
And tip for the viewers, I think we all have had this experience working with policies. If a particular end user really needs an update badly, restarting the Teams client just increases your chances that it'll happen quicker. So, all right. Well, anything more to add, guys?
So
Thanks, Hab. That was a bit of a change up from our regular podcast. Of course, we actually showed something, so I really liked it. It was great to see it live and see the actual thing in progress. So thanks, everybody. Hope that was useful, and we'll catch you on the next episode.